Don't worry. Let's see.
Okay, I think we should begin.
Okay.
If everybody can, all right. Yeah. So we'd like to thank you for braving the weather here today in Chicago, a rainy day, to come out to witness what is a experimental yet hopefully historic moment in Hellenic Link Midwest history, as we are projecting a speaker from Greece who will be speaking to us today uh, in celebration of the Greek Revolution of 1821. So what I will do is I will introduce the speaker and we will take it from there. I don't know if Stefanos or if Kostas, you'd like to add anything about the participation for our online participants. I'm sure they could ask questions by putting it in the chat, or if Stefanos, if you decide to unmute them later. Meanwhile, I do have a microphone, and if anybody here does have questions, I will walk around with a microphone and give them an opportunity to ask the professor questions in either Greek or English. Okay, so Christos Loukos graduated in 1967 from the Department of History and Archaeology of the University of Athens. He attended postgraduate studies in Paris and received a PhD degree in history at the University of Athens. In 1992, he was elected assistant professor, and in 1996, professor at the Department of History and Archaeology at the University of Crete, where he taught undergraduate and postgraduate students. The subjects he specializes in are the Greek Revolution of 1821, social issues of modern Greek cities, issues of the history of the Greek state, history of Greek topography, an introduction to the history of Latin America. His publications, books and articles in journals, and collective volumes deal mainly with these topics. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention, I should have done this before, but it just came to me. I would just like to let everybody know about our next event, which will take place on Sunday, April 26th at 3 p.m. The Hellenic Link Midwest will present Professor Gregory Justanis from Ohio State University in a lecture titled Readings from Cavafy's Life. The event will take place at 3 p.m. at the Four Point Sheraton, Schiller Park, free admission, and the lecture is supported by the Hellenic Foundation. I would like to thank the Hellenic Foundation for their support throughout the years. So at this point, I would like to hand the microphone over to our distinguished lecturer, Christos Loukos.
Dear compatriots, αγαπητοί συμπατριώτες και συμπατριώτισσες, I will try to outline the life and work of Ioannis Kapodistrias. From the beginning, I start with the formation of his personality. Ioannis Kapodistrias was born in Corfu on February 10, 1776. His father was Antonios Maria Kapodistrias and his mother was Diamantina Gonemi of Cypriot origin. He was the sixth of 9 children in the family, 4 girls and 5 boys. Both parents belonged to the local aristocracy, as it had been shaped in the social, political, and administrative framework imposed on the Ionian lands by the dominant Venetian rule. The young Kapodistrias acquired his basic education in the family environment and more specialized knowledge, mainly from Western clerical tutors, since only Catholic monasteries provided the opportunity to educate a child of the nobility in Latin, Italian, French, etc. His command of written Greek was limited, so later in Russia he would attempt to improve it, and throughout his life he continued to write his official and private documents in Italian and mostly in French. In his general formation, the intense religiosity of his close and wider family environment, which included priests, 2 clerical uncles, nuns, 2 aunts, and 2 of his 4 sisters were nuns, was of particular importance. Throughout his career, he consistently emphasized his deep faith in the Eastern Orthodox Church, his trust in its spiritual educational role, and his absolute conviction that divine providence governs human affairs. Like many other sons of aristocratic families, he was sent to the University of Padua for higher studies. His student life began in the autumn of 1795 with his enrollment at the university in the artistic department, where the subjects of medicine and philosophy were prominent. He devoted himself to his studies, and in less than 2 years, he obtained his diploma, the dottorato. He immediately left for Corfu. In the Ioannine state, now Septinsular Republic, in the Ionian state, which was established during the Russian occupation of the Ionian Islands, 1807, he would be appointed Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Naval Affairs and Commerce, an important position, though not a prime ministerial one, as it has sometimes been described. From this position, however, and other similar posts, Kapodistas participated in many of the state's activities and gained valuable experience, particularly in the field of foreign relations. He also played a decisive role in the drafting of the constitutions of the Ionian state. Kapodistas was sent in June 1807 to defend the island of Ithaca from the threat of Ali Pasha of Ioannina. Despite having no military experience, he showed significant organization skills. He coordinated the available Russian forces with the Greek chieftains and the fighting Ionians, built a protective wall with everyone's help, and inspired optimism and determination in the Russian service. He refused to collaborate with the French when the Ionian Alliance passed to their control with the Treaty of Cabo Formio, 1807. Instead, he accepted the offer to embark on a career in the Russian Empire. Kapodistas built his career through sacrifice and persistent effort. He avoided easy and tempting proposals that would have solved his financial problems at an early stage, with a rich marriage in Russia or an administrative position, and would secure an enviable position in the circles of the Russian aristocracy. He wrote to his father, "I have been offered 2 opportunities so far to make an important marriage. There was a happy confluence of all the desirable conditions: birth, upbringing, prestige, money, wealth, expectations, entrance to the court. since both are ladies of the court. I declined both those proposals. The only reason I put forward has to do with my principles. I would be like selling my freedom for a high price. He vigorously sought an active position in the Russian diplomatic service, and when it was given to him, he quickly demonstrated his abilities, exceptional intelligence, erudition, ability to identify the essential in the issue under consideration, ease in spoken communication, and great fluency in written expression, hard work and systematic study, discerning personal charm. In pursuit of his goals, he was hard on himself, sacrificing the pleasures of his personal life. Only one woman seems to have moved him, Roxandra Sturza, but it is, in my view, excessive to attribute the failure of a possible marriage solely to a sacrifice for patriotic goals. In difficult times, he drew strength from his deep Orthodox faith and the ideas his father had inspired in him. The constant communication with him for about 11 years shows the extent of his father's influence. This correspondence always allows us a psychological portrait of Kapodistrias and a multifaceted picture in his everyday life, so that we do not remain limited to his diplomatic and political activities. At the side of the Emperor Alexander I of Russia, he was fortunate enough to be noticed by the Emperor and appointed as his trusted associate. At his side, he found himself at the center of the most important developments of the period 1814-1822, and with his ideas, advice, and interventions, he helped shape crucial decisions affecting the fate of post-Napoleonic Europe. He took advantage of the emperor's liberal tendencies for a time to resist the reactionary effort of Metternich and his like-minded to nullify the major changes brought about by the French Revolution in the political and social organization of many European states. He himself retained certain elements of the liberalism of the time as a system of ideas and political practice, mainly in its humanistic side, but rejected its democratic demands. He abhorred and feared revolutions, which he considered destructive. However, he understood well that the ruling class, to which he himself belonged as the scion of an aristocratic family, could not remain in power without upheaval and the use of violence if it did not make deliberate and controlled overtures from above towards sections of the middle class that possessed property and education. For him, a modern constitution, which would be granted by the will of the ruler and not by his coercion, was the desired combination of the existing political reality with the new demands that had arisen in the meantime. He also realized that the rights and claims of peoples for some form of self-determination could no longer be ignored, especially those of ethnicities whose distinctiveness was being tested or even endangered in multinational state entities. The fate of the Aeolian Islands and the rest of the areas inhabited by Greeks was a vivid and at the same time painful illustration of this problem. Because of his views, he came into sharp conflict with Metternich and Castillery, the English foreign minister, who used every means, often of dubious honesty, to undermine the confidence of the Russian emperor in Capodistrias. They achieved this by taking advantage of Alexander's conservative turn after 1820, who ultimately believed that anything that threatened peace had to be prevented because it ultimately served the revolutionary leadership in Paris, which incited uprising everywhere against established regime. It was in this light that he came to view the Greek Revolution. The contribution of Kapodistrias to European events. Let us mention two of his major interventions in the European events of this era. First, the manner in which he handled his mission to Switzerland and its successful conclusion clearly demonstrated his special diplomatic abilities. The solution, which he persistently helped to impose, ensured the unity, independence, and neutrality of the Swiss. The constitution that was drawn up was a model of a careful balance between the interests and views of the traditional aristocracy and those of the rising bourgeois elite, although with a tendency to favor the former. And we cannot rule out that he would have wanted something similar for the Greek state when he assumed its governance. But in the revolutionary Greece, the political and social reality was different. And the second, among Kapodistrias' most important contributions at the Congress of Vienna, which was concluded in Paris, were his active participation in the completion of the Swiss issue with the ratification of the Constitution of the Federation and the prevalence of the Russian position that France should remain a great European power and Louis, the French king who was restored to the throne, should govern his people on the basis of a constitutional charter over those, Russia in particular, seeking to punish France. And let's pass through the Φιλική Εταιρεία. Kapodistrias refused the leadership of the Φιλική Εταιρεία and tried to prevent the outbreak of a revolution, especially since he knew that the emperor would not support it, and indeed proved to be the case. Kapodistrias believed that the timing of the revolution was not right. He first wanted education to be extended to a large part of the population and their living conditions to be improved, and that at least some European powers should be favorably disposed towards a demand that he did not exactly define as a revolution, but as emancipation from the Ottoman yoke. But when the revolution broke out, he tried to exploit the next massacres of innocent Greeks, and especially the hanging of Patriarch Gregory V, to make Russia the arbiter of developments. Despite his insistence that Russia should not allow its allies to have a say in its relation with the Ottoman Empire, he was not listened to. He watched in pain as the emperor succumbed to Metternich's suggestions and referred the Greek question to yet another Congress of the great powers. Ultimately, his insistence on adapting his own position would displease Alexander, and their separation became inevitable. His election as governor of Greece, his government plans. He eventually accepted his election by the Third National Assembly as governor of Greece after having previously secured his resignation from Russian service and after the three powers had officially decided on their involvement in the creation of a Greek state entity. According to Kapodístrias, Greece in 1828 was not yet ready for a constitutional regime. The country's liberation, its international recognition, and the establishment of a secure borders, the moral and spiritual improvement of the population, and the distribution of land to the landless to free them from the socioeconomic constraints that forced them into dependence on powerful patrons, had to come first. When these conditions were realized, mainly the international recognition of Greece and the formation of a strong class of small farmers, state paternalism could be combined with a form of constitutionalism, provincial councils at first, national representation later. He therefore differentiated the future regime, which he never denied would have a constitutional character, from the temporary regime he established upon his arrival. He even believed that the latter had to be centralized to protect the people from the arbitrariness of the leading groups and to ensure, through the lack of internal conflicts, the continued support of the leading powers during the transitional period. The revolutionary governments had enacted legislation or taken decisions concerning administration, education, health, the economy, as well as other sectors of public life. Although these laws or decisions were not implemented in several cases due to emergency conditions and other reasons, the views contained in the relevant text show the extent to which new ideas had permitted the thinking of their authors. With the arrival of the government, almost everything was planned anew with specific goals. His aim was to build a new society. Let's see now some aspects of Kapodístrias' government work. First, relief measures for widows, orphans, and refugees. Kapodístrias set their care as the main objective of his policy so that they could gradually emerge from the miserable situation they had fallen into due to the consequence of the long-term war. He even wanted to force the wealthy to contribute to meeting the immediate state needs for the relief of thousands of poor people, mainly children and women, who in the first months of his rule were in danger of dying of hunger. His concern, especially for children, was continuous, and he constantly sought resources from Greeks and foreigners to meet at least their basic needs. With the establishment of the orphanage in Aegina, he offered warmth and education to many hundreds of unprotected children. As concerned the public education, emphasis was placed on elementary education with the creation of many mutual teaching schools in all regions of the liberated country. In these schools, because of the lack of enough teachers, the students of higher grades or the best students of a class were teaching the students of lower grades or the other students of their class under the supervision of a teacher. By early 1831, more than 100 government mutual teaching and Greek language schools were operating throughout the country with approximately 9,000 students. Another 5,000 students were taught by private tutors. Efforts to educate girls were very limited. As concerned the health, strict measures were taken to deal with the plague and generally to protect Greek religions from epidemic diseases. As concerned justice, courts of first and second instance were established, and in general, efforts were made to ensure that civil disputes and all forms of offenses be resolved on the basis of the laws and by judges. Prisons were organized. In ecclesiastical policy, Kapodistrias would not fail throughout his career to emphasize his deep faith in the Eastern Orthodox Church, his trust in its spiritual and educational role. However, he maintained absolute control of the church and did not allow the clergy to interfere in politics. In the economy, rationality and strict economizing were imposed in the management of public money through the Economic Committee. The financial bank was established and the first currency, the phoenix, was minted. As concerned agriculture, the calm that prevailed in the country was the most important thing that the Kapodistrian government offered to farmers. They could plant and harvest safely. There was an effort for the registration, rental, and distribution of national lands. The systematic registration of public and private lands was sought through the appointment of special committees so that taxation on production would not be arbitrary and so that the government would have the necessary information before seeking to distribute the national land. The planning of the distribution was attempted, but Kapodistrias postponed it until the last loan he expected but never received would make it possible for the benefit mainly of small farmers. As concerned the press, the government was particularly concerned about the image that foreigners, especially the three protective powers, would form of the country and of himself, with the argument that if this image were negative, the interest of the country would be harmed. He systematically sought to control what was printed in the newly formed state. He saw to it that the newspapers that were in circulation at the time of his arrival were either closed down or placed under government protection, together with their respective printing houses, and preventing or suppressed any attempt to publish an uncontrolled newspaper. Much could be said about other areas of government work, such as the reconstruction of cities and urban planning, the organization of the army and navy, etc. The brief indicative list of what was achieved or attempted is indeed impressive. However, Kapodistrias' insistence that almost everything be planned and monitored by him to be part of an already formed plan, preventing other opinions and approaches that certainly existed from bearing fruit in certain areas. We pass to the political and state issues, the anti-government reactions. Let's return to the political and state issue. Despite all the Kapodistrias' intentions for some future and conditional constitution concession, the sincerity of which could hardly be questioned, in Greece of the 1828-1831, power was concentrated and exercised by one person, with all the positive and negative consequences that this solution entailed. In place of a political pluralism, as he reasonably testified by the meetings of the revolutionary collective bodies, the national assemblies, and the legislative bodies, the opinion of one person, no matter how enlightened it was imposed on the small and large issues of the state under formation. The democratic principles that had been established through the constitutions throughout the revolution, despite the fact that it often functioned to serve the interests and aspirations of individuals and groups, had become established as a reality in the minds of almost all active citizens. Its suspension could be and was tolerated due to the extraordinary circumstances for a short period of time, but it will not be extended until the political and social conditions that the government considers necessary for its implementation in practice were established. Therefore, in the reactions to the centralized system imposed by Kapodistrias, it would be very limiting to detect only the marginalization of individuals and the interests that they were affected, and to overlook a real disagreement about the form that the country's political organization was taking, different from what many consider to be in line with the goals of their revolutionary efforts. On the other hand, if we focus only on the truly conservative political choices of Kapodistrias and do not see the important work he accomplished or tried to accomplish for the organization of the Greek state, we would give a partial picture of a complex reality. For the first time, the power of government acquired real prestige, which Kapodistrias defended with dignity and determination, even in the face of strong external pressures. He also defended, although it seemed to contradict his centralized government the sovereign and constitutional rights of the Greeks when the great powers attempted to impose, in their absence, a monarchical regime. This was something that his opponents did not do when they came to power in 1832. This picture would be even more incomplete if we did not also see the motivations and practices of many of those who disagreed with him, opposed him, wanting his removal at all costs, and of those who murdered him. To ensure his removal from power, they did not hesitate to accept without protest any decisions of the great powers, to assist the continuous English effort to undermine the government, to resort to unfounded accusations and slander. They also tried to integrate the anti-Capodistриan polemic into the ideological confrontation between the Western powers in Russia, especially after the July Revolution of 1830 and the Russian intervention against the Polish Revolution, an engagement which, according to Capodistria, was disastrous since it would transfer the conflicts of the powers to Greece. The assassination. It seems that there was no direct connections between the anti-government leadership which had been gathered in Hydra and the Mavromichalis family who murdered him. However, their act of revenge for the neglect and persecution of their family took on a different meaning within the spirit of tyrannicide that the opposition had formed. There was also no evidence of any foreign involvement in the crime. The assassination relieved those who feared any form of extension of Capodistria's power, but it plunged the country into civil war and disrepute, which perhaps only he still had the ability to prevent by making some concessions. I will finish with some thoughts about the image of Capodistrias in our time. The dichotomous image that is still attempted by many today does not help us to place Capodistrias in the historical realities of the era in which he lived and acted. The bodification, sometimes idealization, that justifies all his governmental choices and ignores or simply condemns any opposing opinion or action does not improve but rather damages his historical image. On the other hand, any unsubstantiated and unilateral criticism of his authoritarian or other choices without understanding the conditions that prevailed when Capodistrias exercised power is unhistorical. There are also some strong stereotypes here that historical discourse tries in vain to mitigate or even overturn. By historical discourse, I mean that which is expressed or written with certain conditions. I repeat, by historical discourse, I mean that which is expressed or written with certain conditions, with certain resources, is not improvised and arbitrary. In the celebration of 200 years since the start of the Greek Revolution, there was no shortage, for various reasons, of these hasty and superficial events, speeches, and writings to ensure a certain participation in current affairs. Fortunately, at the same time, responsive and thoughtful speeches were planned and began to be delivered at conferences or on other occasions. Research programs were drawn up. Noteworthy studies have already been published, and others will soon follow that utilize new evidence. They reassess what was already known, propose new interpretations, and perhaps most comfortingly, several new researchers became involved in the history of revolution that had been ignored in Greek historiography in recent decades. Recently, a very poor film about Capodistриas reproduced the most dichotomous stereotypes in the worst possible way, and the large presence of people in movie theaters to see it and their positive reactions show the great deficit of substantial historical education among today's Greeks. The Greek Revolution, to which the Capodistrian period is naturally included, is a very serious matter, and we need to approach its study with the necessary knowledge and responsibility. Thank you. Sorry for my poor English.
Oh, hello, can you hear me right now? Hello?
Hello,
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. So, right now, we would like to ask if anybody here in attendance has any questions for the professor? Or does anybody in the online chat? Oh, okay.
Can we see a printout of your speech? Because sometimes it was difficult to understand you. I understood the vast majority of what you said, but it would be wonderful if we had if you could give us a copy of the speech.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
do.
Okay, with the permission of Professor Lukos, we will place the speech on the website of Hellenic Link, so everybody will be able to reach it and read it.
And please forgive me, Elaine was here earlier and she reminded me to put on the closed captioning. That would have helped the people here probably read. It's not very good? Okay, well, and it's also a little bit hard to read. But does anybody else have any comments or questions?
If there's nobody from the audience, let me know, Tom.
Nobody from the audience here has any questions.
Yeah, I would place a question. Why the Mavromichalaei murdered Capodistриas? Γιατί οι Μαυρομιχαλαίοι σκότωσαν τον Καποδίστρια, Professor Lukos?
The Mavromichalis, wanting to redeem their great sacrifices in 1821 with a privileged position in the Greek state, something that Kapodistrias, who was interested in all the fighters of the revolution, who had also contributed, refused. Some of their illegal acts were met with measures restricting their freedom. Their murder had the character of revenge, but as I told, took on another meaning in a spirit of tyrannicide that had been formed by the opposition against Kapodistrias.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions, Tom? If you don't, then I will proceed with some other questions.
Any other questions? No, we do not have any over here.
Okay, I would like also to remind to the people who they attend remotely that they can use the Q&A box and type their questions there, and then we are going to communicate them to Professor Lukos. Let me open the Q&A and see if there is any question there. Chat. Stefanos, I don't see the Q&A box at the bottom. What happened to it?
Click more. Okay. I can see the Q&A by clicking more. Okay, I can see the button now. Can you see it?
I cannot see it. So
Okay.
go ahead. Do you have any
There are 4
questions?
questions, Costa.
Okay, go ahead.
The first question is by Mrs. Martha Kirillidou. Can you explain a bit how nationality determined your ability to serve in foreign service? Δηλαδή, πώς η εθνικότητα καθόριζε την ικανότητά σου να υπηρετήσεις σε ξένη υπηρεσία. For example, how did European leaders choose diplomats when those diplomats like Kapodistrias were born in different state countries? So, πώς οι ηγέτες ευρωπαϊκών χωρών διάλεγαν διπλωμάτες που ήταν ουσιαστικά ξένοι? What was it that made Kapodistrias desirable and possible to become a Russian diplomat? Γιατί ο Καποδίστριας ήταν επιθυμητός σαν Ρώσος διπλωμάτης, τον Τζάρο. Αυτά.
Να απαντήσω ελληνικά.
Απαντήστε
Δεν τα
ελληνικά.
κατάλαβα όλα. Δεν ακούστηκαν πολύ καλά. Αν μπορείτε να μου τα πείτε στα ελληνικά και θα απαντήσω ελληνικά.
Okay, το καταλάβατε?
Ώστε.
Yes.
Καταλάβατε την ερώτηση? Η
Δεν
ερώτηση
την κατάλαβα καλά. Αν θέλετε να την επαναλάβετε, σας παραλώ.
ναι. Γιατί είχαν την ικανότητα οι ξένοι ηγέτες να διαλέγουν άτομα ξένης εθνικότητας σαν διπλωμάτες? Για παράδειγμα, με βάση ποια προσόντα διάλεξε ο Τσάρος τον Καποδίστρια σαν υπουργό, ενώ ήταν ένας ξένος βασικά, δεν ήταν Ρώσος?
Ναι. Την εποχή εκείνη, ιδιαίτερα σε αυτοκρατορίες που ήταν πολυεθνικές, ήταν σύνηθες ξένοι υπήκοοι να υπηρετούν έναν βασιλιά ή έναν αυτοκράτορα. Και εδώ ο Καποδίστριας από την αρχή που ήταν στην υπηρεσία τη ρωσική και αργότερα έδειξε εκείνες τις ικανότητες ώστε να τον χρησιμοποιήσει ο Τσάρος. Δεν είναι το μοναδικό φαινόμενο. Αν δούμε ποιοι ήταν διπλωμάτες δίπλα στον Τσάρο την εποχή εκείνη, πολλοί από αυτούς δεν ήταν Ρώσοι υπήκοοι.
Okay.
Δεν ήταν μια εξαίρεση ο Καποδίστριας. Όμως έδειξε τέτοιες ικανότητες ώστε να ανέλθει στο υψηλότερο αξίωμα που ήταν του Υπουργού Εξωτερικών την εποχή εκείνη.
Και συγγνώμη, και γιατί ο Καποδίστριας πώς βρέθηκε στη Ρωσία? Αυτό δεν το κατάλαβα από την αρχή.
Ήταν στα Επτάνησα, όταν ήταν οι Ρώσοι είχαν την κυδαιμονία, εκεί γνωρίστηκε με τους Ρώσους εκπροσώπους και με αυτόν τον τρόπο υπήρξε ένας διάβλος για να πάει στη Ρωσία. και αρνήθηκε,
Okay.
όπως σας είπα, να υπηρετήσει τους Γάλλους. Του πρότεινα σημαντικές θέσεις, γιατί οι Γάλλοι διαδέχτηκαν τους Ρώσους στα Επτάνησα το 1807 και παρά τις προτάσεις δεν τις δέχτηκε και σε λίγο έφυγε για τη Ρωσία. Ήδη
Okay.
είχαν διαμορφωθεί οι προϋποθέσεις για να έχει σχέσεις με τη ρωσική αυλή. Και νομίζω αυτό ήθελε, όπως και ο πατέρας του. Μια
Okay.
ορθόδοξη δύναμη δεν ήθελε να κάνει μια σταδιοδρομία κάτω από τη γαλλική κυριαρχία, διότι δεν συμφωνούσε και με τους στόχους, τους ιδεολογικούς και άλλους της Γαλλίας.
Okay.
Do you want to translate, Stefanos?
I can translate. So the answer briefly is that Capodistrias used to live in Eptanissa, where he distinguished himself. And at that time, Eptanissa was a protectorate of the Russian Empire. So the Russian authorities chose him to give him a public office. And that was not a unique phenomenon at that time, because there were multi-ethnic empires, and they were hiring people that were not necessarily of the dominant ethnicity. So that's the answer in English.
Okay,
The second Q&A,
Go ahead.
can you see the Q&As, Costa, now?
Did you complete?
No, yes.
Oh, I would just like to add that Capodistrias did not agree so much with the French idea, so that was another ideological reason by translating what Professor Luko said. Professor Luko said added also that Capodistrias felt ideologically to be closer to the Russians than to be to the French ideas. So that
Okay.
also, it was one of the reasons that he went to Russia. Okay, then I'm going to read another question from Tassos Chichis. The question is, how did Capodistrias intervene or not to Kolokotronis imprisonment? Στα ελληνικά, πώς ο Καποδίστριας
Μεσολάβησε.
μεσολάβησε για την
Ή δεν μεσολάβησε.
του Κολοκοτρώνη ή δεν μεσολάβησε.
Μιλάμε για την σύλληψη του Κολοκοτρώνη μετά τον εμφύλιο πόλεμο. Προφανώς έτσι, το 1825.
Το 25 δεν είχε σχέση καμία, έτσι δεν είναι?
Ναι, δεν μπορούσε να κάνει κάτι το 25.
So, let me translate it to Dean, to Tassos. Tassos, ο Καποδίστριας φυλακίστηκε το 1825 και ο Καποδίστριας δεν ήταν στην Ελλάδα. Επομένως ο Καποδίστριας and so Capodistrias did not have any involvement with the event. So the next...
Όταν φυλακίστηκε ο Κολοκοτρώνης αργότερα, είχε πεθάνει ο Καποδίστριας.
Yeah.
Εννοούμε τη...
And then later, when he was again imprisoned, then Capodistrias was already dead. So Capodistrias did not have anything to do with the imprisonment of Kolokotronis, either before Capodistrias or after Capodistrias. These events did not happen during the Capodistrias rule. There is another question from Panos Hadjimichos. Thank you very much for the informative lecture. The question is, were you consulted about the movie? So, ερώτηση είναι, ζητήσανε τη γνώμη σας, ο Σμαραγδής ζήτησε τη γνώμη σας για το φιλμ που παρουσίασε.
Όχι.
The απάντηση is no. He was not consulted. The next question is from Vangelis Economou. You mentioned that Kapodistrias had accrued a much governmental power personally and that he controlled the people's rights, including over the press and others. Was he an autocrat or did he have autocratic tendencies? So the question is, it was mentioned in the lecture that Kapodistrias had concentrated all the governmental power to himself, and that included...
Excuse me, Costa?
yeah.
Costa, can we have Stefanos ask the questions? Your volume is very low. We cannot hear you that well here.
Okay, go ahead, Stefanos. Stefanos, are you there?
I had muted myself. So the
Okay,
question
go
from
ahead.
Vangelis Economou is, you
Okay.
mentioned that Kapodistrias had accrued as much governmental power personally and that he controlled the people's rights, including over the press and others. Was he an autocrat or did he have autocratic tendencies? Δηλαδή, ο Καποδίστριας πήρε μερικές αυθαίρετες αποφάσεις, μάλλον μερικές αποφάσεις προσωπικά. Σαν να λέμε executive orders τώρα. Και έκανε control τα δικαιώματα των ανθρώπων και τα δικαιώματα του τύπου και άλλα δικαιώματα. Επομένως, ήταν αυθαίρετος ηγέτης, αυταρχικός ή είχε τάσεις αυταρχικές?
Σίγουρα είχε συντηρητικές τάσεις, αλλά πρέπει να μεταφερθούμε στην εποχή και να δούμε τις πραγματικότητες. Ένας πολύ αξιόλογος νομικός τελευταία έβγαλε ένα βιβλίο όπου περιγράφει την περίοδο, την πολιτική του Καποδίστρια τον περιγράφει ως συνταγματικό δικτάτορα. Δηλαδή, από τη μια μεριά έχουμε μια τάση συγκέντρωσης εξουσίας, απ' την άλλη όλα γίνονται με βάση ένα σύνταγμα το οποίο έχει ανασταλεί, δεν έχει καταργηθεί. Αν ήθελε ο Καποδίστριας να κυβερνήσει δικτατορικά, χωρίς περιορισμούς, μπορούσε να το κάνει μόλις έφτασε. Δεσμεύτηκε παραμερίζοντας το Σύνταγμα ότι θα επανέλθει σε αυτό αφού δημιουργηθούν κάποιες προϋποθέσεις. Σίγουρα υπάρχει μια αυταρχικότητα, αλλά θα έλεγα να μεταφερθούμε στην εποχή και να καταλάβουμε τι σημαίνει συγκέντρωση της εξουσίας στην εποχή εκείνη και να μην κάνουμε παραλληλισμούς με νεότερες καταστάσεις. Νομίζω ότι προσπάθησα να δείξω και τις τάσεις τις αυταρχικές που είχε ο Καποδίστριας και τους λόγους γιατί τις πήρε, αλλά να δείξω ότι και αρκετοί Έλληνες δεν πίστηκαν απόλυτα ότι έπρεπε να περιμένουν τόσο πολύ ώστε να δημιουργηθούν οι προϋποθέσεις για να ξαναγυρίσει πάλι μια μορφή συνταγματικής εξουσίας. Απ' την άλλη μεριά, μια και μιλάμε για το 1921, και πριν τον Καποδίστρια και μέσα στην Επανάσταση υπήρξαν τάσεις συγκεντρωτισμού για να αντιμετωπιστούν τα προβλήματα του αγώνα. Δηλαδή δεν θα ήθελα να είναι μονόπλευρη η πλευρά. Ναι, μεν ο Καποδίστριας έχει αυταρχικές τάσεις, αλλά υπάρχουν και στοιχεία που δείχνουν ότι πράγματι ήθελε κάτω από ορισμένες προϋποθέσεις να περάσουμε σε μια ελεγχόμενη ελευθερία, θα έλεγα.
Okay, can you translate, Stefanos? Stefanos?
So authoritative practices were not uncommon during that era. He was a product of the era. Yeah, there was a constitution from Epidavros beforehand, but he felt the need to use special measures because the country was young and there were still threats. But he believed that in the long term, he would reinstitute some constitutional normality. Did I get it correct, Costa? Do you have to add anything?
That's okay.
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 I don't see any more Q&A questions.
Okay, let me ask a few questions, if you don't mind. Professor Lukos, who from the personalities of the Greek Revolution were supporting Kapodistrias and who opposed him? Ποιοι από τις προσωπικότητες της Επανάστασης βοήθησαν τον Καρποδίστρια και ποιοι ήταν αντιμέτωποι του?
In his favor were Theodoros Kolokotronis and the military men he influenced, Ανδρέας Μεταξάς, Νικόλαος Σπηλιάδης και άλλοι που δεν είναι τόσο γνωστοί, αλλά ήταν στο πλευρό του. Δηλαδή, δίπλα στον Καποδίστρια δεν ήταν μόνο άνθρωποι που τους ταξινομούμε στους φιλελευθέρους. Λάθος. Δίπλα στον Καποδίστρια δεν ήταν μόνο άνθρωποι που τους ταξινομούμε στους συντηρητικούς. Υπήρχαν και φιλελεύθεροι, οι οποίοι πίστεψαν στο κοινωνικό πρόγραμμα του Καποδίστρια. Επομένως, είναι άνθρωποι που τα ονόματά τους δεν είναι πολύ γνωστά, αλλά ήταν μαζί του μέχρι τέλους. Τώρα, τους αντιπάλους, το μεγαλύτερος ιδεολογικός αντίπαλος ήταν ο Μαυροκορδάτος και ένα περιβάλλον διανοωμένο γύρω του, ανάμεσα στους οποίους ο Πολυζωίδης, ο Φαρμακίδης, ο Τρικούπης, ήταν ο Μαυρομιχαλέη, η οικογένεια Κουντουριώτη, ο Ανδρέας Μιαούλης, δηλαδή μεγάλα ονόματα της Ελληνικής Επανάστασης. Αυτά θα μπορούσα να αναφέρω.
Ευχαριστώ. For those that they don't understand Greek, I will just briefly say that with Kapodistrias was Kolokotronis and other personalities, and there were also personalities that they were liberal, but they were believing that the social work that the Kapodistrias was doing was good, and so they were willing to wait for better times. Against him was Mavrokordatos, Κουντουριώτης, Μαυρομιχαλέη και άλλα ονόματα τα οποία δεν είναι πάρα πολύ γνωστά όπως αυτές οι προσωπικότητες. As these personalities.
Okay, Costa, there were a couple of earlier questions by Tassos, and then he has a new question too. So he had a question about Mavrokordatos and Koletis.
Yeah, but this was for Kolokotronis,
Yeah, but
imprisonment.
yeah, that was the first question. But then there was a second unrelated question about the involvement of Mavrokordatos and Koletis in the killings of all the. Okay, he says, since the facts are well established about Mavrokordatos and Koletis, since the facts are well established about their involvement to the killings of practically all of the leaders of the revolution, how come we still honor them? I guess this is a rhetorical question. So, γιατί συνεχίζουμε να τιμούμε σαν έθνος, σαν ήρωες, τους Μαυροκορδάτο και Κολέτη, ενώ ήταν υπεύθυνοι για τη θανάτωση από πολλούς από τους αρχηγούς της Επανάστασης?
Νομίζω ότι αυτή η ερμηνεία δεν αποδίδει την πραγματικότητα. Και ο Κολέτης και ο Μαυροκορδάτος προσέφεραν πολλά στην Επανάσταση, προκάλεσαν αντιθέσεις. Δεν νομίζω ότι πρέπει να βλέπουμε αυτή τη δράση τους μονόπλευρα. Υπήρχε πάντοτε μία άποψη ότι οι αγνοί αγωνιστές παρασύρθηκαν, παραμελήθηκαν από τους διανοούμενους, τους πολιτικούς. Νομίζω πρέπει πιο νυφάλια να δούμε και τη δράση και το ΜΕ και το ΔΕ. Εγώ ο ίδιος ετοιμάζω μία μονογραφία για το Μαυροκορδάτο, οπότε θα προσπαθήσω και εκεί να δείξω την πορεία του και φυσικά θα αναφερθώ στη σύγκρουση που είχε με τον Καποδίστρια.
Okay, so the answer in brief is that the professor disagrees and thinks that both Mavrocordatos and Koletis made significant contributions to the revolution, and it is unfair to say that only the warriors were worthy and that the intellectuals were impeding them or dynamiting their work. Also Tassos has a practical question. How can we order your book from the USA? Πώς μπορούμε να παραγγείλουμε το βιβλίο από την Αμερική? Θα πάμε μέσω ίντερνετ σε κάποιο ελληνικό πρακτορείο, Φερρυπίν?
Ναι, το βιβλίο εκδόθηκε από το Μορφωτικό Ίδρυμα της Εθνικής Τράπεζας και μπορεί να υπάρχουν και e-book.
Okay. So the book was issued by the National Bank of Greece, the educational establishment of the National Bank of Greece, and there may also be an ebook. Dean, I will search it and send you some link. In the past, myself, I have ordered books directly from Greece by mail, and they did arrive. Of course, nowadays the mail is very unreliable, so who knows? It may take months if you order it. Then some more Q&As appeared, Costa. There is another question by Tassos and another question by Tassos. No, actually, that's the same.
Okay,
And then there's another question by Panos Hadjimitsos and another question by Vangelis.
Okay, go ahead, read them.
Okay. Third question by Tassos. Until recently, the Greek government, through the years, has not honored Kapodistrias properly. Many say powerful forces did not allow this. Can you tell us about these forces? Ο Τάσος λέει ότι υπάρχει κάποια συνωμοσία ή σιωπής, γιατί λέει οι ελληνικές κυβερνήσεις δεν έχουν δώσει την ανάλογη τιμή στον Καποδίστριο που του άξιζε και ότι υπάρχουν σκοτεινές δυνάμεις που εμποδίζουν την απόδειξη της τιμής που του αξίζει. Μπορείτε να μας πείτε τίποτα για αυτές τις σκοτεινές δυνάμεις?
Δεν πιστεύω σε σκοτεινές δυνάμεις και δεν νομίζω ότι εμποδίστηκε ο Καποδίστριας, ίσα ίσα που εκείνη που τον ήμνησε περισσότερο ήταν η δικτατορία, γιατί της δινόταν η ευκαιρία να καταγγείλει τα κόμματα, αλλά και οι άλλες κυβερνήσεις πάντα υπήρχε ένας σεβασμός απέναντι στον Καποδίστρια, κυρίως οι πιο φιλελεύθεροι είδανε την αντιπολίτευση. Και εγώ ίδιος δεν σας κρύβω, όταν ξεκίνησα την καριέρα μου έβλεπα πιο κριτικά τον Καποδίστρια και σιγά σιγά, μελετώντας όσο το δυνατόν μπόρεσα να κρατήσω μια ισορροπία. Δεν πρέπει να βλέπουμε διχοτομικά, όπως τόνισα, τα πράγματα. Πρέπει να δούμε σφαιρικά και ιδιαίτερα σε μια τόσο κρίσιμη περίοδο που είναι η Ελληνική Επανάσταση.
Okay, but so the professor disagrees on the argument that he was not honored, that he was not recognized by the Greek government, and he thinks that both the left and the right wings did recognize Kapodistrias, each one for their own reasons. For example, the dictatorship liked the fact that he abolished a lot of political parties because the dictatorship did the same. But and also the professor himself had doubts about Kapodistrias in the beginning of his career, but as he further researched his personality, he changed his mind, and now he thinks that he's a great leader. Panos Hadjimitsos, what was the population of Greece in 1830 or about?
Ποιος ήταν ο πληθυσμός?
Ναι.
Εξαρτάται σε ποια περιοχή έχουμε υπόψη μας. Εάν λάβουμε υπόψη τα όρια του ανεξάρτητου κράτους από το 1830-32, γύρω στους 500.000 πρέπει να ήταν όλοι.
Αυτό νομίζω κι εγώ. Τα
Ναι.
όρια έφταναν μέχρι πού? Μέχρι τη Λάρισα, τα Φάρσαλα?
Όχι, όχι. Ήταν από Αάρτα, κάτω από τον κόλπο του Βόλου. Κοιτάξτε, στην αρχή, το 30, με την επέμβαση της Αγγλίας, έμεινε έξω από τα σύνορα η Ακαρνανία και εκεί έδωσε μάχη ο Καποδίστριας. Όταν αργότερα το 32 οριστικά έγινε το ελληνικό κράτος και βασιλιάς ο Όθωνας, μπήκε μέσα και η Ακαρνανία. Επομένως φανταστείτε τα σύνορα και η Ακαρνανία από τη μια μεριά και η στερεά Ελλάδα όλη από την άλλη μεριά.
Okay, so you said the population was about 600,000 of the within the official borders, which went all the way up to Akarnania, etc. Okay. Vangelis Economou, what was the reaction of the recently liberated Greek population, first to the Kapodistrias government and second to the assassination? So then essentially, how did the simple people, what did they think about Kapodistria? Ποια ήταν η αντίδραση και η γνώμη του λαού της πρόσφατα απελευθερωμένης Ελλάδας? Ποια ήταν η αντίδραση του λαού απέναντι στην εκλογή και στην διακυβέρνηση του Καποδίστρια και απέναντι στη δολοφονία του τελικά?
Ο λαός ήταν υπέρ του Καποδίστρια μέχρι τέλους και θρήνησε το θάνατό του.
Okay.
Δεν έχουμε αντίδραση από τα λαϊκά στρώματα. Ήταν ηγετικές ομάδες αυτές που είχαν μια διαφορετική άποψη και οι οποίες είχαν κυβερνήσει μέσα στην Επανάσταση. Αλλά ο λαός το θεώρησε προστάτη και θρήνησε το θάνατό του.
Okay, so the popular masses, the masses of the people were positive to Kapodistria. They considered him a protector and they mourned his death. The people that were against him were certain elites. And this comes to my question. My question is, what is eventually the verdict on his murder? Who was behind the murder? Who executed the murder? Who was behind? And what were their goals? What were they trying to accomplish?
Θα μου το πείτε ελληνικά?
Οι δολοφόνοι ήταν αυτοί που νομίζουμε ή υπήρχε ολόκληρη συνωμοσία από πίσω και τι προσπαθούσαν να επιτύχουν? Ήταν για λόγους εκδίκησης ή προσπαθούσαν να επιτύχουν κάποιο άλλο σκοπό?
Νομίζω είπα στην ομιλία μου ότι υπήρχε μία εκδίκηση, αλλά πήρε άλλο χαρακτήρα σε ένα πλαίσιο έντονης αντιπαράθεσης προς τον Καποδίστρια. Επομένως πήρε άλλο περιεχόμενο μία εκδικητική ενέργεια. Ενώ έγινε μία προσπάθεια από τους συνεργάτες του Καποδίστρια να βρούνε ποιοι κρύβονταν πίσω από αυτή την... και δεν βρέθηκαν ούτε ξένες δυνάμεις, ούτε οι ηγέτες της αντιπολίτευσης στην Ύδρα. Κάποιες επαφές των Μαυρομιχαλιών δεν μπορούμε να αποκλείσουμε, αλλά δεν ήταν ένα οργανωμένο σχέδιο στο οποίο πρωτοστατούσε η αντιπολίτευση που ήταν στην Ύδρα ή κάποια ξένη δύναμη. Δηλαδή αυτό που παλαιότερα πίστευε κυρίως η αριστερά, αλλά όχι μόνο η αριστερά, ότι υπάρχει ένας φάκελος για τη δολοφονία του Καποδίστρια στα αγγλικά αρχεία και είναι μυστικός και δεν δίνεται στην έρευνα είναι λάθος. Η Αγγλία υπονόμευσε τον Καποδίστρια, δεν τον δολοφόνησε.
Okay. Αυτό που το λέτε είναι αλήθεια, δηλαδή πραγματικά τον υπονόμευσε ή τον
Τον
νομίζουν?
υπονόμευσε διότι από την αρχή, καταρχήν να ξέρουμε ότι δεν είναι ο Γιώργος Κάνινγκ στην εξουσία. Έχει πεθάνει το 27 όταν ο Καποδίστρας αναλαμβάνει κυβερνήτης. Ο Ουέλινγκτον που έγινε ο επόμενος πρωθυπουργός θεωρούσε τον Καποδίστρια όργανο της Ρωσίας και η Αγγλία μέχρι το 30-31 ήταν σαφώς εχθρική. Ήθελε να φύγει ο Καποδίστριας. Και αυτό
με
δεν
ποιον τρόπο?
βοήθησε.
Δεν
Ναι,
βοήθησε.
θα σας πω. Πρώτον, απέσυρε την υποστήριξή της τη φανερή. Ενώ δηλαδή φαινόταν στην αρχή ότι και τρεις δυνάμεις θα ήταν δίπλα στον Καποδίστρια, γι' αυτό ήταν και τα πλοία τους. Μετά από λίγο τα αγγλικά πλοία δεν συνοδεύουν τον Καποδίστρια, όπως τα γαλλικά και τα ρωσικά. Μετά, όλοι οι διπλωμάτες που ήταν στην Ελλάδα έκαναν ό,τι μπορούσαν για να ενισχύσουν την αντιπολίτευση. Και το άλλο που είναι πάρα πολύ σημαντικό, η Αγγλία πολέμησε από την αρχή τη δυνατότητα να πάρει ένα μεγάλο δάνειο Καποδίστριας, 60 εκατομμυρίων φράγκων, που αν το έπαιρνε θα ήταν διαφορετικά τα πράγματα. Τελικά δόθηκε στον Όθωνα.
Με ποιον?
Επομένως έχουμε μία εχθρική στάση από την Αγγλία, η οποία φοβάται ότι μια Ελλάδα μεγάλη θα δημιουργήσει προβλήματα στην κατοχή των Επτανήσων από τους Άγγλους. Φοβάται πολύ ότι τα Επτάνησα θα είναι σε άλλη μοίρα όταν γίνει ένα ισχυρό ελληνικό κράτος. Μπορώ να συνεχίσω λίγο για τις άλλες δυνάμεις.
Ναι,
Συνήθως κάνουμε το λάθος να βάζουμε δίπλα-δίπλα τη Ρωσία, την Αγγλία και τη Γαλλία. Η Γαλλία και η Αγγλία είναι έντονα εχθρικές μεταξύ τους. Και η Γαλλία υποστηρίζει μαζί με τη Ρωσία τον Καποδίστρια μέχρι το 1830 που είπα, όταν έγινε η Ιουλιανή Επανάσταση και μέσα στο φιλελευθερισμό που ξεπήδησε δεν μπορούσε να τον βοηθήσει. Επομένως, αν ο Καποδίστρας άντεξε μέχρι το 31 ήταν γιατί μέχρι το 30 Ρωσία και Γαλλία τον υποστήριζαν και η Αγγλία τον πολεμούσε. Όταν μετά το 30 την Ιουλιανή Επανάσταση και η Γαλλία δεν τον βοηθάει, το παιχνίδι είχε παιχθεί, θα έλεγα, σε μεγάλο βαθμό.
Okay, I can attempt to summarize in English. So there doesn't seem to be a hidden conspiracy because it was just an act of revenge by the Mavromichale. There has been a lot of speculation that England was behind his murder, but the professor does not think this is true. But England indeed undermined him and withdrew its support in practical ways. For example, they would not approve loans and they withdrew their navy. And that's because England did not like Kapodistrias because he wanted the Eptanissos independent. And England did not like to lose their control of the Eptanissos. Costa, if you want to add anything, you're welcome.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I would like to ask another question. You mentioned the national lands. How do you they were defined, the lands that they were considered for distribution? How these lands they were defined and what ideas were circulated at the time about the distribution of these lands? Στα ελληνικά, για να μεταφράσω, αναφερθήκατε στα εθνικά κτήματα, ας τα πούμε, και μπορείτε να μας πείτε πώς οριζόταν αυτά τα εθνικά κτήματα που θα ήταν για να διαμοιραστούν και τι ιδέες επικρατούσαν την εποχή εκείνη, πώς να γίνει αυτός ο διαμερισμός.
Λοιπόν, είχαμε πάρα πολλά εθνικά κτήματα, γιατί όσα κτήματα άφησαν οι Τούρκοι μετά την εξόντωσή τους ή τη φυγή τους, έγιναν εθνικά. Άρα λοιπόν υπήρχαν πάρα πολλά κτήματα διαθέσιμα για να μοιραστούν σε αυτούς που δεν είχαν. Και ένα κρίσιμο θέμα μέσα στο 21 είναι να μην μοιραστούν χωρίς κάποιες προϋποθέσεις. Έρχεται ο Καποδίστριας και ορίζονται διάφορες επιτροπές για να... Επειδή περίμενα αυτή την ερώτηση, έχω κάτι σημειώσει στα αγγλικά να το διαβάσω καλύτερα για να μην σας βάλω στον κόπο να μεταφράσετε. Λοιπόν, όταν ήρθε ο Καποδίστριας, commissions sent throughout the country recorded national, private and ecclesiastical estates. There were some plans and thoughts for their distribution, but Kapodistrias postponed their implementation until he received the large loan he had requested from the great powers. Without this, he considered it impossible to achieve a distribution that would be benefit the entire population. The loan would amount to 60 million francs under the guarantee of the three protectoral powers. With this, Kapodistrias intended to distribute the national land by giving loans to poor farmers to lay the foundations for the repayment of the English loans of the revolution, to compensate those who contributed to the struggle. England refused its consent from the beginning. No way was found to guarantee it with the other two powers. It was eventually given to King Otto and wasted without productive investment. Δεν ξέρω αν απάντησα σε αυτό που θέλατε.
Yes, yes, I understood. Thank you. I appreciate that. And another question, during the time of Kapodistrias, who was making laws in Greece? Τα χρόνια του Καποδίστρια, ποιος ήταν ο νομοθέτης στην Ελλάδα?
The laws were drafted by the Secretary Ministry of Justice, approved by the governor after first seeking the opinion of the Panhellenion, a small legislative body, and later the Senate. The courts of first and second instance heard mainly civil cases and sometimes criminal cases.
So there was a Panhellenion and a Senate operating during the...
Oui. Το Πανελλήνιο ήταν ένα σώμα νομοθετικό, όπου στην αρχή ήταν όλοι οι αντιπολιτευόμενοι, και ο Κουντουριώτης και ο Μαυροκορδάτος, και εκεί πέρα έστειλε ο Καποδίστριας στα σχέδια των νόμων. Όταν κάποιοι άρχισαν να αντιδρούν, πρόσθεσε μερικά δικά του άτομα και έτσι είχε την πλειοψηφία. Δηλαδή μπόρεσε να ελέγξει, και αργότερα μετά τη Εθνοσυνέλευση που του ανανέωσε την εντολή, η Σύγκλιτος ήταν περισσότερο φιλοκυβερνητική, αλλά και αντιπολιτευόμενη, αλλά η πλειοψηφία ήταν φιλοκυβερνητική. Άρα είχαμε δύο μικρά νομοθετικά σώματα δίπλα του, αλλά μπορούσε να παρακάμψει τις αντιδράσεις κάνοντας διάφορους ελιγμούς.
Who had elected those στο Πανελλήνιο και στο Senate? They were elected before Kapodistrias, and then Kapodistrias, he added some more people later?
No. He was, όταν έφτασε, φρόντισε να βάλει στο Πανελλήνιο εκπροσώπους από όλες τις ισχυρές κοινωνικές ομάδες.
He appointed them.
Ναι. Όταν όμως Αργότερα, ναι, ο ίδιος τους διόρισε και αργότερα όταν έγινε γερουσία μετά την...
I cannot hear you. Stephanos, we lost voice.
I can hear you, but I cannot hear the professor.
Oh,
Ναι,
make sure that he has not been muted.
He is not muted.
Oh,
I'm here. Were you asking?
No,
Can
the
you hear me?
professor. Κύριε καθηγητά, δεν
Εγώ
σας
σας-
ακούμε.
εγώ σας ακούω.
Σας ακούμε τώρα.
σας ακούμε. Σε κάποιο διάστημα χάσαμε.
Θέλετε να πείτε τίποτα ή τελειώσατε?
Όχι, απάντησα νομίζω στο ερώτημα.
Εντάξει, θαυμάσια.
Κώστα, there is another question by Thomas.
Okay, Θωμά, please go ahead.
Well, I put it in English. My question, and I'll leave it up to you or Stefano to translate, was what were the main critiques that Professor Lukos has about the recent movie about Kapodistrias that was released in Greece?
So, κύριε Λούκο, μας είπατε ότι απορρίπτετε την ταινία, δεν σας άρεσε η ταινία, είναι κακή. Για ποιο λόγο την απορρίπτετε?
Λοιπόν, επειδή περίμενα αυτή την ερώτηση, έχω γράψει κάτι και μπορώ να σας τα πω στα αγγλικά, αν θέλετε.
Very good.
Okay.
Ωραία. There are historical errors in this film that cannot be justified by the argument that its creator, taking poetic license, may not remain faithful to historical facts. For a personality that is so well known to the general public, they are not justified because they give a distorted image of the personality of the first governor and those who stood by him or fought him. Kapodistrias himself would protest the image attributed to him. He does not need this sanctification. His important work does not need it. The dichotomous perception of the past as well as the present is destructive to the effort for Greeks to acquire historical knowledge. In this film, we find all the stereotypes, the good personality, the savior, and on the other hand, the many evil opponents who hinder his work. A lady at the end of a performance where I was present said, "We do not want parties. We need another Kapodistrias." Mr. Smaragdis deliberately appealed exclusively to the emotions and not to the logic of the audience. Αν θέλετε κάτι άλλο, αυτά...
Okay, I think it's getting late, so let's have Tassos Chichi's last question, and then we will close this session. So, Tassos says, can you hear me well?
Ναι, εγώ σας ακούω.
Ωραία. Tassos says, there are many who they believe, υπάρχουν πολλοί οι οποίοι νομίζουν ότι ο Καποδίστριας πρέπει να ανακηρυχθεί Άγιος. What do you think about it? Τι νομίζετε γι' αυτό?
Νομίζω ότι έχουμε φτάσει στα όρια της αστειότητας. Νομίζω δεν είναι σοβαρά πράγματα αυτά και η αλήθεια είναι ότι προβάλλει πάρα πολύ τη θρησκευτικότητα του Καποδίστρια, η οποία είναι πραγματικότητα, αλλά σας είπα, ο Καποδίστριας δεν ανέχθηκε επέμβαση της Εκκλησίας στο πολιτικό του έργο. πίστευε στην Ορθοδοξία και ήθελε η εκκλησιαστική παράδοση να είναι παρούσα και στη διαμόρφωση της εκπαίδευσης, αλλά αυτά τα πράγματα που λέγονται νομίζω ότι μας πάνε πάρα πολύ πίσω. Δεν είναι σοβαρά. Και όμως πολλοί τα πιστεύουν και φυσικά τα πιστεύει και η Εκκλησία, γιατί προβάλλεται σε μεγάλο βαθμό η θρησκευτικότητα του Καποδίστρια. Αυτή η λύση που έδωσε ο Σμαραγδής, να έχει δίπλα το Καποδίστρια σε όλη την πορεία έναν εκκλησιαστικό, είναι πρόκληση κυριολεκτικά στη λογική του Καποδίστρια. Νομίζω ότι είπα μερικά πράγματα.
Very good. Tassos understands very well Greek, so he got the response. Ο
Okay.
Τάσος καταλαβαίνει πολύ καλά ελληνικά, επομένως κατάλαβε την απάντηση.
There is one final question by Evangelis, which is interesting. He's asking, how did Capodistrias view the foreign powers' desire to impose the rule of a king over Greece? Υπήρχε πρόθεση επί κυβέρνησης Καποδίστρια από τις μεγάλες δυνάμεις να φέρουν βασιλιά?
Μάλιστα, θα σας απαντήσω. Το 1830, όταν η Ελλάδα έγινε ανεξάρτητη, με πρωτοβουλία της Αγγλίας, περιορίστηκαν τα σύνορα, έμεινε έξω η Ακαρνανία που σας είπα και εκλέχθηκε βασιλιάς ο Λεοπόλδος. Δηλαδή νομίζω ότι ο Λεοπόλδος ήταν ο πρώτος βασιλιάς που εκλέχτηκε για την Ελλάδα, αλλά παραιτήθηκε μετά από λίγους μήνες. Ο Λεοπόλδος θα κράταγε τον Καποδίστρια συνεργάτη του, εάν δεν είχε παραιτηθεί. Επομένως η εκλογή ηγεμόνα ήταν πρωτοβουλία των δυνάμεων, ιδιαίτερα της Αγγλίας, που ήθελε με αυτόν τον τρόπο να πάψει να υπάρχει ο Καποδίστριας επικεφαλής των ελληνικών πραγμάτων. Είναι μια μεγάλη ιστορία. Ναι,
Ο Καποδίστριας
συγγνώμη.
πώς αντέδρασε?
Στην εκλογή, όχι του Όθωνα, η εκλογή του Όθωνα ήρθε μετά τη δολοφονία.
Ο Καποδίστριας εκδήλωσε
Δέχτηκε την εκλογή του Λεοπόλδου. Έβαλε το Λεοπόλδο να δώσει μάχη και για τα σύνορα και οπωσδήποτε να εξασφαλίσει το δάνειο των 60 εκατομμυρίων. Και εδώ αντέδρασε η Αγγλία και υπήρχε ένας λόγος, όχι ο μόνος, που παραιτήθηκε ο Λεοπόλδος. Η αντιπολίτευση φυσικά έριξε το βάρος στον Καποδίστρια. Αλλά για πρώτη φορά ο Καποδίστριας υπερασπίστηκε τα δικαιώματα των Ελλήνων να έχουν άποψη. Διότι αυτό ανακοινώθηκε στην κυβέρνηση. Δεν ρωτήθηκε κανένας. Η αντιπολίτευση δέχτηκε την εκλογή χωρίς καμία αντίρρηση για τον περιορισμό των συνόρων. Το θέμα ήταν να φύγει ο Καποδίστριας. Τώρα ο Καποδίστριας, αν μπορούσαμε να τον ερμηνεύσουμε, θα ήθελε να παραμείνει 7 χρόνια, γιατί για 7 χρόνια έχει εκλεγεί, αλλά οι εξελίξεις ήταν διαφορετικές.
Okay, so the answer in English is that Capodistrias accepted the selection of Leopold as the king, and Leopold actually struggled and gave a successful fight to add Akarnania to Greece. But and the opposition was also supporting Leopold, but some in the opposition demanded that Capodistrias resigns as soon as Leopold becomes active king. Although Capodistrias was expecting that he would be retained by Leopold as a prime minister until his term of 7 years that he was initially selected for expires. Eventually, though, Leopold resigned because there were some internal reactions within the great powers. So it became a moot point. That's
Very
it.
good. Did you finish, Stefanos?
Yes, I don't think we have
Very good.
anything else.
So I would suggest to close it because it's getting very late for Professor Lukos in Greece. We have 7 hours difference.
Δεν πειράζει, αν θέλετε κάτι άλλο. Αν θέλετε άλλη ερώτηση δεν πειράζει.
Πρέπει να πηγαίνει 1 η ώρα τώρα.
Εδώ έχουμε 11 και
11,
12
οκ.
παρατέταρτο.
12 παρτεδάρτο, οκ. Σωστά.
Μάλιστα.
Σωστά, 6 ώρες διαφορά έχουμε εδώ.
Let me ask you a question then. How many Greeks could they read newspapers at that time? Πόσοι Έλληνες μπορούσαν να διαβάζουν εφημερίδες τότε?
Θα έλεγα ότι είναι όχι πολλοί, αλλά μην ξεχνάμε ότι όταν ξέσπασε η Ελληνική Επανάσταση ήρθαν πάρα πολλοί νέοι στα πανεπιστήμια της Ευρώπης, στην Ελλάδα, και έχουμε πολλούς διανοούμενους. Γι' αυτό και έχουμε ανθρώπους που μπορούν να εκδώσουν εφημερίδες. Και μετά μην ξεχνάμε κάτι άλλο. Την εποχή εκείνη ένας διάβαζε και πολλοί ακούγανε.
Μάλιστα.
Κάτι που συνεχίστηκε και αργότερα. Αλλά όλοι θέλανε να μάθουν και μαθαίνανε.
Great, very good. Μπράβο. Μάλιστα. Λοιπόν, let me τότε να σας ρωτήσω και μια από τις πρώτες ερωτήσεις που σας είχα στείλει. Πόσο Καποδίστρια
Ναι.
πίστευε ότι θα μπορούσαν οι Έλληνες να μορφωθούν παραμένοντας κάτω από το Οθωμανικό ζυγό, because ήθελε, αν θα γίνει κάποια επανάσταση ή κάποιο κίνημα, να γίνει εφόσον the living conditions στην Ελλάδα βελτιωθούν και ο πληθυσμός μορφωθεί κατά κάποιο σημαντικό ποσοστό. Πώς περίμενε ότι αυτό θα μπορούσε να γίνει κάτω από τους Τούρκους?
Πριν το 1921 έχουμε μια οικονομική ανάπτυξη των ελληνικών περιοχών, κυρίως του εμπορίου.
Μάλιστα.
Έχουμε μια ανάπτυξη των γραμμάτων γενικότερα και στους Έλληνες του εξωτερικού αλλά και μέσα στην Ελλάδα. Είναι η γνωστή ο νεοελληνικός διαφωτισμός. Υπήρχαν δηλαδή βελτιώσεις ώστε να αισιοδοξούν όλοι ότι αργότερα, το ίδιο πίστευε και ο Κοραής, κάτω από ευνοϊκές συγκυρίες θα μπορούσε κάτι να γίνει. Και δεν εμπόδιζαν οι Τούρκοι στο σύστημα αυτό την οικονομική ανάπτυξη και την ανάπτυξη της παιδείας. Δεν έχουμε εμπόδια. Τουλάχιστον συγκεκριμένα.
Αυτό ήταν πρωτοβουλία των Ελλήνων, but not the only thing, το μόνο που έγινε ότι οι Τούρκοι το ανέχθηκαν. Δεν νομίζω οι Τούρκοι το προωθούσαν ή απλώς ήταν πρωτοβουλία των Ελλήνων.
Τους εξυπηρετούσε η ανάπτυξη του εμπορίου, γιατί δεν είχαν και αυτοί ισχυρό ναυτικό, δηλαδή δεν εμπόδισαν τους Ιδραίους και τους άλλους να αναπτυχθούν, ούτε περίμεναν ότι οι Έλληνες θα εξεγείρονταν. Δηλαδή θέλω να πω, ναι μεν υπήρχε τουρκική παρουσία και πολλές φορές είχαμε αγριότητες, αλλά σε γενικότερο πλαίσιο δεν εμποδίστηκε η οικονομική και πνευματική εξέλιξη. Περισσότερα εμπόδια είχαμε από συντηρητικούς κύκλους όταν είχαμε προοδευτικές ιδέες και όχι από τους Τούρκους. Χωρίς να σημαίνει αυτή ότι το πλαίσιο δεν ήταν καταπιεστικό. Ήταν καταπιεστικό και ακριβώς επειδή είχαμε μια ανάπτυξη πνευματική και οικονομική, γι' αυτό υπήρχε επιθυμία για περαιτέρω εξέλιξη που δεν θα μπορούσε να γίνει στο πλαίσιο της Οθωμανικής Αυτοκρατορίας.
Επομένως το emancipation θα ερχόταν από ποιους? Ποιοι θα υποστήριζαν οι μεγάλες δυνάμεις?
Ο Καποδίστρας πίστευε ότι θα ήταν αδύνατο κάποια στιγμή να μην γίνει σύγκρουση της Ρωσίας με την Οθωμανική Αυτοκρατορία. Και προσπαθούσε, δεν μπορούσε ευθέως, με διάφορους τρόπους. Δηλαδή έπρεπε να καταγγελθεί μια σύμβαση για τις παραδουνάβιες περιοχές. Και αυτή έδωσε αργότερα και σε μια σύγκρουση. Θέλω να πω, περίμενε ότι κάποια στιγμή, και αφού θα είχαν οριμάσει και οι συνθήκες, αλλά με μια ευρωπαϊκή παρέμβαση, όχι με μια επανάσταση, αλλά είπαμε ότι όταν έγινε η επανάσταση κατάλαβε ότι έπρεπε να βοηθήσει με τον τρόπο του.
Μάλιστα. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για αυτή τη θαυμάσια διάλεξη Θα έχουμε την αδειά σας να βάλουμε τη διάλεξη στην ιστοσελίδα μας.
Όχι. Όχι κανένα πρόβλημα, κανένα, όχι, με χαρά μου και λυπάμαι πάρα πολύ που τα αγγλικά μου δεν ήταν τα καλύτερα για να προσπάθησα πάντως.
Το εκτιμούμε όλος ιδιαίτερα και με την ομιλία δημοσιευμένη στο ίντερνετ όλοι θα μπορούν να τη διαβάσουν ελεύθερα στα αγγλικά γιατί είναι πολύ καλογραμμένη, επομένως δεν θα υπάρξει πρόβλημα.
Τώρα, φυσικά καταλαβαίνετε ότι σε μια σύντομη ομιλία δεν θα μπορούσαν πολλά προβλήματα να τονιστούν. Αν
Σωστό.
κάποιος έχει πρόσβαση στο βιβλίο μου θα δει πώς επιχειρηματολογώ και προσπαθώ να δω και τις άλλες απόψεις. Δεν πιστεύω ότι εγώ μονοπολώ τη σωστή άποψη. Είναι η δουλειά μας αυτή και γι' αυτό είμαι και αντίθετος με τον Σμαραγδί και άλλους που θέλουν να εμφανίσουν μία πλευρά μόνο, ενώ σε μία πολύπλοκη πραγματικότητα. Πόσο μάλλον όταν έχουμε μία επανάσταση.
Σωστά.
Λοιπόν, εγώ σας ευχαριστώ για την πρόσκληση και εύχομαι το καλύτερο σε όλους σας.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Καθίστε για λίγο.
Ναι.
Τόμ, μπορείς να κλείσεις παρακαλώ τη διάλεξη. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ τους ακροατές μας. Thank you very much for those who they participated in our lecture. You will find the lecture published in our internet, in our website, so you can go there and read it. And we look forward to see you at the next lecture. So please, Tom, can you please close it? And you, Stephanos.
Okay, I will let Tom say something and then I will stop the recording.
Oh, there was a question from Chichis, which I did not see it.
Yeah, πάλι από τον Τάσο.
Yeah. Well, ο Τάσος τώρα δεν νομίζω ότι θα μας ακούει.
Tom, I cannot hear you. Let me...
But it's obvious that Kapodistrias gave even his life.
Hello?
Hello.
You can hear me?
Yeah, Tom, yes.
Yes, unfortunately, it's raining hard and I think we're right underneath the roof. And the rain is actually pounding hard on the roof and we could not hear much of what Kostas had to say. But we just want to thank everybody for attending. There's a few people left here in attendance in the audience. And like I mentioned before, we hope everybody comes out to the next event on Sunday, April 26th at the 4 Point Sheridan on the lecture by Professor Justanis on Constantine Cavafy. Thank you.
Tom say he's going to talk about the life at work. So he's going to read poetry of Cavafy also.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that note, Kostas.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much, Tom.
Okay, thank you. We're going to log off.